Welcome to Mission Majjhima, Ajahn.
Ajahn.
Ajahn, so tell us about Majjhima number 80, the Vekhanassa Sutta.
So the Vekhanassa Sutta is very interesting and almost a sequel to the previous sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 79. In it, we have the Buddha staying at Jeta's Grove and Anathapindika's Park in Savatthi, and he's approached by Vekhanassa, who the commentaries say is Venerable Udayan's, Sakul Udayi's teacher from the previous discourse, who the Buddha basically more or less converted or almost converted, although he didn't end up completely going forth under the Buddha. And it's interesting because it appears in the sutta that word got back to Vekhanassa, and he's almost trying to salvage his reputation and confront the Buddha after his disciple was basically bested or converted more or less. And interestingly, Bhante Sujato makes the point that Vekhanassa, there's a sect of kind of wanderers and poets associated with the Vedic tradition. And that perhaps there's some connection here because much of the language Vekhanassa uses is very poetic, talking about the resplendent ultimate radiance as a radiant gem and such. So perhaps some connection between those poets of the forest and this particular wanderer in his sect. So he basically puts forth the same doctrine that Sakul Udayi did last sutta, saying the ultimate is the ultimate radiance. And the Buddha says, what is the ultimate radiance? And he says it's this splendor of which no splendor surpasses, and basically just stacking superlative on top of superlative. And once again, when the Buddha basically humorously says, you could go on like this for quite a long time, Vekhanassa, he's pointing to something quite profound in that the problem of defining the ultimate in terms of positive terminology of it's just, at some point you just start stacking on how good something is without really saying much about it. And the Buddha's approach of really pointing out what you let go of to get to the ultimate, let go of this personality, of suffering, of the body, these are not you, and understanding that as a very precise and safe route to the ultimate rather than just trying to raise up a concept for what is beyond concepts. So very interesting there. He also gives the same critique of this ultimate when Vekhanassa says it's like a beryl gem, apparently referring to the third jhana of the state of radiance of heart and mind. And the Buddha basically pointing to the slipperiness of poetic language where he says, well, what is brighter, a beryl gem or a glowworm? And what is brighter, a glowworm or, so on through the morning star and the sun, and just the slipperiness of defining a spiritual path in terms of poetic language and just that. Then interestingly, the Buddha kind of points out the 5 chords of sensuality, which apparently Vekhanassa was somewhat attached to, and seems about to perhaps point to what's beyond them, but in some commentators say at this point, Vekhanassa gets so excited he cuts in and says, oh, I believe there's also the ultimate sensual pleasure. And some commentators believe the Buddha was about to expound the way to Nibbana, but that Vekhanassa kind of cuts in. What is interesting is the Buddha then kind of corrects him and says, actually, you don't understand this ultimate as I do. It's different in the teaching of the Tathagata, pointing to Nibbana, not just sensuality, not just sensual happiness. And Vekhanassa gets angry. He says, this Gautama will be worsted. And basically says, if an arahant doesn't know the past and future, how can they legitimately say they know that birth is destroyed, that they will not be reborn? And in the Pali, the Buddha agrees, says, yes, that is, they can accurately be refuted, but let the past and future be. Give me a sincere man, honest. I will teach them the Dhamma in such a way that they can attain liberation. And interestingly, in that passage, he's pointing to the direct experience of the path, apart from past and future, and also the importance of a disciple who is honest as this key quality and sincere, which is beautiful. But this is one of the instances where comparative studies are actually quite useful, where in the Chinese versions of the suttas, the Buddha doesn't say, if one doesn't know the past and future, they can't accurately say birth is destroyed. In the Chinese version, what he says is, actually let the past and future be. Bring basically the teaching down to this present moment. Send me a wise person who is sincere and honest, and I'll teach them the Dhamma to liberation. And then he uses the simile of an infant who having been bonded, knows they're freed, and they don't need to know the full extent, have a perfect memory of their bondage before, but they know the sense of freedom. And in that exact way, a liberated mind knows it's liberated even if it doesn't recall all of its past lives. So kind of a beautiful ending image. Ajahn, what would you draw out of this discourse?
Yeah, so a number of things to draw up from this sutta. You can see if you compare the version that's in the Wisdom edition by Bhikkhu Bodhi and that which is on Sutta Central by Bhante Sujato. Each of them use this, what's in Pali called payala, which is basically the use of ellipses, so to truncate a sutta. So in the Wisdom publication, Bhikkhu Bodhi actually elides like 8 sections or so because we just saw them in the previous sutta. Whereas on Sutta Central, there's also use of these ellipses to elide, to shorten the sutta, but not quite as much as Bhikkhu Bodhi does. And I think it's useful for people to experiment with seeing how much elision or lack of elision is actually helpful. I know monastics who will go back to the Pali if they're learning a sutta, or even the English, and will recite the sutta or memorize the sutta with full recitation. So not doing any elision, not cutting out any piece. But that can be really useful because originally when these suttas were being memorized, repeating what seem like stock phrases and what are kind of annoying to read because we're not used to reading just straight verbatim repetition on page after page. But it's helpful to kind of learn and memorize the concepts that are being pointed to. So this whole sutta is about sensuality and that which is beyond sensuality. So in the Aranavibhanga Sutta, Majjhima number 139, the Buddha says you should know how to define sukha. And knowing how to define it, you should pursue pleasure internally. So here the Buddha talks about, as in that Majjhima 139, there is the type of sensual pleasure. So sight, sound, smells, taste, touch. And if you are reciting this or adding in all of what is elided, you will see sights which are wished for, desired, agreeable, likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of lust. Sounds cognizable by the ear, which are wished for, desired, agreeable, likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of lust. Similarly with smells, taste, touch, which are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of lust. Just that repetition really makes you turn back in. Okay, what is this that the Buddha is turning to? The Buddha is defining sensuality. And here he does it with Vekhanassa. There is this whole realm of sensuality. But there is that which is beyond the realm of sensuality. And that is, when the Buddha says that, Vekhanassa, as you point out, says, yes, I totally agree. But then the Buddha qualifies and says, actually, for someone who is immersed in sensuality, they don't even understand sensuality or sensual pleasures or that which are beyond sensual pleasures. And in that Aranavibhanga Sutta, the Buddha talks about this type of internal pleasure, which is to be pursued, is to be cultivated, is to be developed. And that is the pleasure, the sukha, which is connected with renunciation, nekama, or connected with seclusion, that which is connected with peace, that which is connected with awakening. So these are the type of pleasures which are beyond sensuality. And this type of pleasure is somewhat rarefied. It's a type of pleasure or peace or happiness which a lot of people haven't experienced. So you go in your first meditation retreat, or you sit meditation for some period of time, and you, even if you haven't yet touched a piece, a pleasure which is beyond sensuality, you might even just intuit it. And then you go home and you tell your family or you tell your friends, oh, this meditation thing, it seems like there's a lot of potential there. But because your family or your friends are just totally immersed in sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, which are wished for, desirable, agreeable, likable, connected with sensual desires, and provocative of lust, They don't see anything which is beyond there, and they've never sat with themselves and don't know the pleasure which comes about from just sitting quietly in a room alone. So, like Vekhanassa, you might get a lot of pushback. So, yeah, I would encourage everybody to pursue that, to take it from the book and actually bring it into your heart. So, Ajahn, what is the word of the week?
The word of the week is Bhagava, which means the blessed one, the sublime one. It's the term that the Buddha's disciples used to refer to him. And it comes from the root bhaj, which means to share. So you can take that as you want. Either there's a share of goodness in the blessed one and he shares it out or something, but it's blessed one.
All right, well, let's all bless our surroundings, bless our lives,